Good evening, everybody. My name is Ruth Arisman. With Susan Glassman, I'm co-president of Women's Voices, Race for Social Justice. And we really want to welcome you here this evening to our September educational program. Before we actually begin the meat of the program, I just want to offer a heads up about a few events that Women's Voices will be hosting over the next weeks. Next week on September 15th, we have a lunch and learn at noon with Chris Krameyer from Beyond Housing, who will speak to us about affordable housing. We also have a book club meeting next week. And on September 24th, we're kicking off a new opportunity of a movie club on September 24th. There are details about all of these on our website. So please visit and we welcome your participation. We also have a lunch and learn that's not yet scheduled, but it will feature Gloria Bilczek. Gloria is a Women's Voices member, and she's written a book called Election Insiders, Behind the Scenes with People Who Make Your Vote Count. She talks about some of the election jobs that you've never thought of and talks about some of the challenges that both administrators and workers in elections face. So as we always do, we want to invite you to become a member of Women's Voices. We welcome your participation in our Racial Justice Committee, our Advocacy Committee, and our Common Sense Gun Solution Committee, which distributes gun locks and promotes education about gun violence as a public health issue. We'd love to have you work with us. Our strength is our numbers. You are our hands, our feet, and our voices. So we look forward to having you involved. So I'm going to turn the program over to Michelle Steinberg, who's going to introduce tonight's panel. Michelle?
Well, thank you all for joining us today. There's a lot to cover, and I'm sure there'll be questions. So we'll just get started. We're grateful today to be joined by three true experts in voting rights and advocacy. Jennifer will be speaking first. Jennifer Lohman is the director of the St. Louis Area Voter Protection Coalition and a League of Women Voters Election Committee member. She organized the area's largest ever election protection field program in 2018 as a volunteer for the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition, and she's currently the coordinator of the 2020 election protection efforts in the metro area. She also serves as a member of the National Election Protection Anti-Disinformation Working Group, and she'll be sharing with us this evening how we can all do our part individually to stop the spread of voting misinformation, which is so important in the weeks leading up to the election. Next, we'll hear from McKinney. She joins us from Public Citizens in Washington, D.C., and is the co-director of Democracy for the People campaign. She co-founded the Secure Our Vote Coalition, which works on the state and local level to encourage election officials to secure the vote and allow for recovery should a hack occur. She also co-leads the Public Citizens work, building a broad movement to get money out of politics and ensure that every vote counts. And we all know that no voting could happen without the efforts of our local boards of elections across the country. Eric Fay, the Democratic Director of Elections in St. Louis County, will share with us the nuts and bolts of how to vote in November. He served as the Democratic Director of Elections in St. Louis County since 2015 and has worked in various roles in the field of election administration since 2004. He's an active member of the Election Center and serves as a co-chair of the Legislative Committee of the Missouri Association of County Clerks and Election Authorities. All of our panelists are here this evening to educate you, to inspire you, and to help you make sure your vote counts, not only in November, but in every election. From primary elections to school board races to national and statewide contests, your vote is your voice, and we hope you use it each and every election. So Jennifer, please educate us on what we can do between today and Election Day to ensure free and fair elections for all.
Well, that's a pretty tall order, but I think what I'll start talking about is the most important thing, really. I mean, misinformation, disinformation, and manipulation are probably three of the biggest things that threaten elections in our country right now. And the one I think that we can do the most about personally, aside from just, being a skeptical consumer of social media and not sharing anything that we can't verify, that type of thing, the most important thing is to know what the rules are for voting and then not share any misinformation accidentally, because even well-intentioned misinformation can still be harmful. And right now, with so many changes going on because of COVID and for other reasons, people are sharing what they see, what they think are, these great solutions to problems that keep cropping up. The problem is that a lot of times what's being shared are things from other states or from somewhere else in the, even from somewhere else in the state, where every county in Missouri does things a little bit differently in terms of like the technology they use. And then every state, every one of the 50 states has completely different election laws and practices. So what is correct for, one group of people from another state is not going to be correct for us. So people just need to be really careful in how they say it. And so without hopefully not stepping on Eric's presentation too much, I just want to go through some of the, basic rules about voting in Missouri in 2020, so that when people see things online, they have a frame of reference for, what is correct. And, obviously, be registered to vote, be registered at your current address. I know people talk a lot about purges and being kicked off the rolls, but really the most important thing is just, make sure you're registered to vote at your current address, and then you don't have to worry about anything. So do that, check it, make sure you're registered. So in Missouri, right this year, there are 4 different options for voting. You can vote absentee in person. You can vote absentee by mail. Both of those require one of 7 excuses in order to cast your ballot. You can vote in person on election day, or you can vote with a no excuse mail-in ballot. And those last 2 don't require any excuses or reasons, but they do have some limitations. And I'm just going to go through that super quickly so that everybody kind of has an idea of what we're talking about. Again, it does seem like it's really sometimes can be confusing, and there's a lot to cover. There will not be a quiz afterward, because all you need to do is make a plan, and there's always somebody that you can ask for help if you're not clear about something that's happening. So, and here we actually have developed a number of these voting plan templates. And if anybody's interested in them, just email me. I'll be happy to provide them for you. And this is the kind of thing that can walk folks through exactly what they need to do in order to make sure that they, do all the things they need to do to cast a valid ballot. So your options for voting in person, same as they kind of always have been. You can vote absentee in person at your local election authority or satellite office starting September 22nd. I should say that the satellite office is open later. The local election authority opens on September 22nd. You don't have to apply beforehand. You don't need a notary. You just have to give one of the 7 reasons for voting absentee at the time you vote. And then, of course, you can vote in person on election day. And I won't give anything else away, because I know Eric wants to talk about the great fact that there are some options in St. Louis County that have never been available before. So, that's your foreshadowing for that. You don't need a photo ID to vote in Missouri. You can use any one of these acceptable IDs, including a current utility bill. So don't worry about that. And then here's where kind of the issues occur. These are the options for voting by mail. And this is where people really stumble in Missouri, because 2 different things changed, but they sometimes get a little bit conflated. The first thing you need to know, though, is that nobody is automatically getting an absentee ballot or a mail-in ballot. Every voter has to apply for it. You have to apply for it every election. So if you sent one in for one election, doesn't matter, you got to send it in for this one. So you have to apply for every election separately. And, despite persistent rumors to the contrary, all valid absentee and mail-in ballots are counted regardless of how close an election is. And I think those are some of the areas where you see the most misinformation and disinformation right now regarding voting is, what happens with absentee and mail-in ballots. Well, in Missouri, they are counted first, actually, I think, in most jurisdictions. So you don't need to worry about that. The big difference here, though, is absentee by mail versus mail-in. They sound like they should be the same thing. They are totally not the same thing. And there are some super important differences. And these differences are what have caused so much confusion. And there was a viral post that went around a couple of weeks ago that took up the whole weekend, trying to track it down and tell people that no, that may work in other states. It's not going to work in Missouri. And here's why. Absentee by mail is something we've always had. There is an extra excuse this year that we didn't have before, but absentee by mail is something we've always had. So you have to use one of the excuses to apply, and you can apply by mailing this form in, you can email it in, you can fax it in, you can apply for an absentee ballot on behalf of your kid who's in college. So those are all things that can be done with the absentee ballot application. And then when you're ready to return the application, one of the benefits is that you can return an absentee ballot in person, or a close family member can do it for the voter. And that helps when people are so concerned about the post office, which is another area where a lot of misinformation, disinformation, and genuine concern is rising in social media. So knowing that the absentee ballot you can do, of the 3 steps in getting this ballot: applying for it, getting the ballot, and returning the ballot, 2 of those 3 steps can be done without any use of US mail whatsoever when you're doing the absentee by mail ballot. The mail-in ballot is something completely different that can only be applied for by taking the application in personally or mailing it in. And when you get this ballot, it can only be mailed in. It cannot be accepted any other way than by US mail. And so that gives you some limitations, particularly if you apply later on in the process and it takes longer for the ballot to get to you. Whatever, you could be cutting it close, because Missouri does have a strict received by deadline. So your absentee by mail or mail-in ballot has to be in the hands of the election authority by 7 o'clock on election night, or it doesn't count. And there's no do-overs, there's no exceptions. It's got to be there. So that's why, if you are worried about relying on the mail, you need to make sure that if you can use an absentee by mail ballot, that if you qualify with one of those 7 excuses, that you choose the absentee by mail ballot. And if people are interested, the deadline to apply for this is October 21st. Don't wait till then. You can apply for either of those ballots right now, and you probably should. And I'm just going to go really quickly, just let people see these slides. There are a way that you can walk through it for any situation. We have the answer, and I'll provide these slides to anybody who wants them afterwards. So, people who are permanently disabled can vote absentee all the time. If you're over 65, again, this is how you apply. You have to check the box that's highlighted there. And when you vote this way, you don't need a notary seal on the ballot envelope when you send it in. And that's also kind of important. Same with using the incapacity or confinement due to illness excuse. No notary seal will be required on the ballot envelope. But for the other absentee ballot excuses, you will need to have your ballot envelope notarized. And of course, all mail-in ballots require a notary on the ballot envelope. And in talking, there are a couple different ways to find a notary. The notary requirement is currently in court, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, except to say that if you need to find one, call the League of Women Voters. Missouri Voter Protection Coalition will be putting up a notary hub pretty soon, but I think a lot of that is dependent on how the lawsuit works out. And nobody's going to need a ballot notarized for a while, so we have a bit of time on that. Here's the really important thing about the ballots. I referred to the envelope and getting a notary on the envelope, but that's not the only thing you need to worry about on your ballot envelope. Every county has a different ballot envelope for returning the mail-in or absentee by mail ballots, but they all have one thing in common, and that is that there is a statement on the outside of that ballot, and you must complete that statement, verify your address, and sign it. Whether or not it needs to be notarized, you still need to fill out that statement. You still need to verify your address, and you still need to sign it. And then also, I know a lot of people are concerned about privacy, but don't mark out your return address and don't mark out any barcodes on the envelope, because that will prevent your ballot from being verified when it gets back to the election office. So please know that, fill everything out correctly, get it back there by 7 p.m. on election day, and don't mark anything out on the ballot envelope. If something goes wrong, and this is another area where people are always, a lot of disinformation goes out, and I don't want to repeat any of it, except to say that, if you get an absentee ballot and something goes wrong or you change your mind, you still have options. You are not married to one thing. Until you have cast a valid vote, you always have the option to do something different in case something goes wrong. I mean, if your dog eats your ballot, or you lose it, or you make a mistake, or you just change your mind, you always have options. And the important thing there is to know that you should just call 1-866-OUR-VOTE. Like I said, there's not going to be a quiz here. But if there were a quiz, the quiz would be, can you remember this phone number? Because that's how you are going to get all your problems solved. Everything from, am I registered to vote, to, hey, where's my polling place? Or, oh my gosh, I applied for an absentee ballot and I never got it, and it's 3 days before the election. What do I do? In every one of those cases, you have options, and you will be able to cast a valid vote as long as you are proactive about seeking out solutions. So what can you do to help everybody kind of navigate this system this year? And there's a couple really important things. So going back to spreading misinformation or disinformation, when it comes to voting information online, unless it comes from an organization, like the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition or the League of Women Voters, don't share it. A lot of times people can say, oh, I called my clerk's office and they told me XYZ. Well, that's still secondhand, and, they may have misunderstood what they were being told. Just, and especially if you see a post that says, hey, I've found the solution to all the problems with voting if you just do A, B, and C. Well, just don't share those things, because they may not apply to your state. They may not apply to your county. Just stick with organizations that and voting information that And of course, you can always share things also directly from the election authorities, but just don't share anything else about voting if you can avoid it, because many times those super popular memes are not necessarily applicable to Missouri. The other thing is, when you see things online that say, oh, let's debunk these myths about voting, or don't debunk things, because when you debunk them, you repeat the myth, and that still gets into people's heads. So they've still heard it, they're still absorbing it. So just don't even say that. You can give proactive information. Just don't repeat the myth in order to debunk it. Just give information proactively. And that goes for sharing things too. If you see, there are many memes, it's like, a meme that says, well, so-and-so thinks X, Y, and Z, but really the truth is, A, B, and C. Well, you've just told everybody X, Y, and Z, and people have short attention spans. It's been absorbed, and, that was a mistake. So just don't share those things. And then also, if you can't verify something, don't share it. And that goes for anything. It goes for news articles, photos, memes, whatever. You honestly never know. I mean, even reputable news organizations sometimes jump the gun on issues, and you might end up sharing around something that is later retracted. People don't always know which news sources are legitimate. I have seen people sharing stuff from newspapers that, while not The Onion, are clearly similar in vein. They're satirical papers, and they're thinking, oh my God, this really happened. And I'm like, no, it didn't happen, because that's totally a satirical newspaper. But they can be deceiving, and they can look very real, especially in this year when life does seem a little bit like a bad Onion article. You just have to be extra, extra careful. So if you can't verify something, don't share it. And that especially goes for pictures of sharks swimming in city streets after hurricanes, because, man, that thing has come up after every single storm in every single state. So just like, no, sharks are never going to be swimming on the interstate, guys. Also, I know we've said a lot today, and I know that there is a lot of noise out there about, concerns about the election and foreign interference and people not being able to figure out what's going on and changes in the law. Just, you have to stop listening to that at some point. Just walk away from it and say, you know what, instead, I'm going to do something proactive. If I'm worried about crowds on election day and I'm worried about how the election is going to go, well, sign up to be a poll worker, and make sure that the crowds on election day are a little bit less, because they are able to open more polling places by having more poll workers. Or you can volunteer for election protection. And the different opportunities you have there are, you can, as an attorney, you can volunteer to answer hotline calls or handle escalations. If you're a field volunteer, you can be a polling place monitor or a roving monitor to make sure everything's going okay and that voters who are in line know that they can call the hotline with problems. And you can also be a virtual volunteer as a social media monitor. And I think we hopefully we'll hear some more about that tonight, but it's a really great program. And it not only helps you become a better consumer of social media, but it helps you get out there and get the word out to voters who are concerned about their options for getting help, particularly 1-866-OUR-VOTE. And then I promised I would talk about this event coming up. The Voting Rights Alliance and the Transformative Justice Coalition are hosting a John Lewis Good Trouble Voter Awareness March on September 22nd. We will be gathering in Keener Plaza Park, just west of the old courthouse where the Dred Scott trial was held. And there will be some speakers and an inspiring program. And we would really like to get a lot of folks there to, listen to that program and then march from the site of the speakers down to the election board on Tucker for city residents to register and perhaps vote absentee on the first day of absentee voting. So that is pretty much everything, except, if you're wondering where to get information about candidates and issues on your ballot, League of Women Voters is definitely the place to go, vote411.org. They also do a nonpartisan, unbiased voter guide, but that probably won't be available until after absentee voting has already started, so just bear that in mind. And that is pretty much it. So I guess if you're holding questions for later, then
yeah, we'll do questions at the end.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And Makene, I think we're ready for you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to be sharing this panel space with such incredible voices. I have such an admiration for Jennifer Lohman, Eric Fay. Thank you. Election officials are essential workers and have really been on the front lines of making sure that our society runs the way it should. And just really appreciate all that you're doing. It's a very stressful time. So thank you also for being here. My name is Akani Freechild. I'm with Public Citizen. I do democracy work around anti-corruption, e.g. getting big money out of politics, voting rights, and election security. And I'm going to be talking about a number of different topics. First, just what's going on nationally right now and what we're trying to win still in Congress to support 2020 elections that are safe as possible for folks and also fair. Talk a little bit about the USPS, just a little bit. I'm going to hit a little bit more in depth on some of the disinformation pieces that Jennifer spoke about, and then a couple of other little things around election security, Amendment 3, and then wrap up. So this is an action we did in May, and there was a fantastic action in Missouri as well, led by Denise Lieberman. I imagine some of the folks on the call were part of it, online, calling on Congress to fund our elections. So because of the pandemic, many states, for the very first time, many local election officials are running 2 or 3 different elections. Sometimes they're running early vote, which is one election day, in-person voting, and now most states have a dramatically expanded absentee voting system, which Jennifer described. There's the mail-in and the absentee. So that's a lot more to do, and election officials are traditionally underfunded and underappreciated, and they have a lot of bosses, a lot of people to report to, and not necessarily funding to make everybody as happy as honestly we should be. This is our democracy we're talking about. So we did a number of drive-ins and online press events that got great coverage around the country. Just everyday people like those of you watching putting this together. This is the one we did in Virginia, spelling out protect our vote with our cars. And that was somewhat fruitful. Congress passed $400 million to fund our elections, and that's been distributed and been used for PPE and poll worker costs in Missouri and all 50 states. However, it wasn't enough money, and I know for a fact that many Missouri counties are short what they need to make sure that they can pay their poll workers and overtime staff to manage, again, 3 different voting systems at once. We saw the House pass 3.6 billion for elections in May, and that has sat and sat and sat in the Senate. It has not gone anywhere. They also passed 25 billion to fund the post office. That has not gone anywhere. There was a GOP Senate bill introduced in August that had no money for elections. Another bill was introduced in the Senate today by the GOP. It also failed, but had no money for elections. So we are coming on a funding deadline at the end of this month. We need to see money for our 2020 elections. In that bill, there is bipartisan agreement by local election officials nationwide. There have been association letters from Missouri and many, many other state associations of local election officials saying, you know, we're trying to do our best by our democracy, but state budgets are strapped, local budgets are strapped by the pandemic, and we want to be able to make sure people can vote safely. We need help. So one thing that you can do on the federal level tomorrow is call your senators. Senator Blunt has typically been supportive of election funding in the past, and he's certainly senior in the Senate, so that's an important person to call. But please call both of your senators and tell them how important this is for you. There's a number here, 888-415-4527. I'm going to talk a little bit more about disinformation, more from like a personal standpoint of what you can do, and I'll reiterate some of the things that Jennifer said, but also this is more sort of in the cultural impact on our democracy side of things, that how to deal with trolls. So something happened in DC a couple weeks ago, and a friend of mine posted about it, and it was a very active conversation. And very quickly, a couple people he'd never met before, who were not friends of any of his, on Facebook, started posting memes very, very quickly, very divisive content. And he asked them, I don't know you. I don't know anyone who knows you. How did you find my post? And why are you doing this? We're having a conversation among friends. And what he did was call out trolls. These were people who were intentionally trying to spread disinformation and evoke division. And they had two goals in mind. One, to divide people on party lines and increase the division in our country. But the other, more invisible, was to get people who are not as engaged in politics in our democracy to think, you know what, this is confusing, this is dark and icky, and I don't like it, so I'm just not going to vote. And those are two very damaging things for our democracy, and it's clearly part of the strategy that we see foreign powers evoking in our elections, and possibly local American actors who are being girded on by interests that want to see our democracy weakened. So I just want to speak to what you can do about this cultural activity that everybody can see who's active on social media right now, that is eroding our democracy by telling people that they're more different from each other than they are, by spreading disinformation. So some of the things that Jennifer said, I'm not going to reiterate. Of course, make sure that you know what you're sharing. And then try to combat trolls in a couple of different ways. So you're not going to try to debate them on the issues that they're posting about. That's what they want. They want your reaction. Instead, if they say something that is either dangerous or false, and you know it to be false, you can flag it for the platform, which is really important. You can also, if it's specific to elections and voting, you can call that number again, which I'll keep repeating because it's a good one to remember, 866-OUR-VOTE, or you can report it on commoncause.org/disinfo. And that helps us monitor what's going on, see what the patterns are, try to respond to that disinformation. And then if you do want to counter it, share as little of the disinformation as possible. So rather than saying so-and-so said XYZ and that's wrong, you say bad actors are trying to convince people of this general idea. Here's some information that can help you know what the reality is, but not spending a lot of time, definitely not retweeting, reposting folks who are spreading disinformation. That just helps them. So that's trolls, a little bit more there. I'm also going to repeat two other links that Jennifer had. Again, you can recruit 2 poll workers or 2 poll monitors if that's not something you feel safe doing. Again, helping with that disinformation tracking is really helpful, and that feeds into both a state system but also a national system that helps us all kind of have a fair election. So even outside of Missouri, friends and family can engage on these 2 sites. Public Citizen was an active supporter of the Clean Missouri ballot measure in 2018, and we're really disturbed to see efforts to roll back some of that progress. And I just wanted to flag that I encourage folks to vote no on 3, because the people's voice needs to be heard. It's a law enacted by the people, and everyone deserves to have fair maps and fair representation. That's what democracy is about. And Amendment 3 would specifically overturn that. Here are some more messages, and Jennifer, please pipe up if any of these do not apply, but I believe these are generally good things that anyone can do nationwide again. So if you're sharing on social, you want to get some proactive messages out there. People should check their voter registration, make sure it's accurate. My mom has been voting in the same place for 20 years, and her voter registration wasn't accurate at the beginning of this year. That is really important. And if you find a problem, call 866-OUR-VOTE, the solution to all problems. Because sometimes that can be evidence of a hack of the voter database. Often it's an error, but we want to be able to see those patterns, and we can't see them unless you report them. So make sure you're registered, keep calm, vote early. Some of you, that means voting in person. Some of you, you have an option to vote absentee or mail-in, or you want to take that option, I should say. Request your ballot early if that's the option that you're going with. Tell your friends and family, we're not going to know the results of the presidential election for sure on election night. It's going to be very delayed. If you can do nothing else from what I say tonight, tell 3 people the election results are going to be very delayed, maybe weeks. People need to have that expectation, because we don't want to have instability based on people thinking that they know the answer when we haven't counted all those mail-in ballots. Every ballot must be counted. Again, what Jennifer said, make sure you sign the ballot envelope, follow all the instructions. That's a universal. And then I'm not as worried about the Postal Service and delivering ballots as you might have heard some folks in the news. I think the Postal Service is very, very committed to delivering ballots on time. But if it is close to Election Day, especially in Missouri, you need to get it to the right place, not in the mail. So just mail it early, and then you don't have to worry about it. But if you're within a week of Election Day, you need to get it to the right place to drop it off, because you want to make sure that it counts. There's a lot to be done on election security in Missouri. There is federal funding available at the state level. It needs to get to local election officials. At this point, this is more of a post-election thing, but I just wanted to point it out. And that is it for me.
Thank you. There's so much for us all to take in, and so that's why we're gonna have questions afterwards, because I've been getting them via email. Eric, would you like to touch on anything that wasn't covered, or give kind of a behind the scenes look of what happens on Election Day at the Board of Elections, what we don't all see as voters that you guys are doing?
Sure. Yeah, I'll talk about just a couple of things, and I will be brief because Jennifer and Kenny really did a great job of explaining things. And I think it is important for everybody listening to know that Jennifer and the Voter Protection Coalition and the League of Women Voters, as she mentioned, are great repositories of information. As a matter of fact, they helped us tremendously before the August election in contacting voters whose absentee and mail ballots were deficient in some way, trying to ensure that those voters' ballots counted. So we appreciate their efforts, and they're great allies to work with on the election administration front. The only things I'd like to add are just to reemphasize the point that the previous 2 speakers made. Please request your ballot now, as soon as possible. And when you get it, fill it out and send it back as soon as possible. In St. Louis County, we've already received, I think today we just went over the 100,000 absentee ballot or mail ballot application mark. We're processing those feverishly. We've got a night shift coming in every night to work on those applications. So we want to be ready to send those ballots out on September 22nd, once absentee voting and mail voting begins. And I just like the other speakers, I like to describe absentee and mail voting as almost giving voters 2 bites at the voting apple. If you're a little nervous about absentee voting, you've never done it before, because in Missouri, not many people have voted by mail before. It has in St. Louis County, it's never really been more than 10% of the votes at any given election prior to COVID. So if you're a little nervous about it, try it. And as I think Jennifer said, if something doesn't work out, you don't get the ballot, your dog eats it, or the election, you send it back and the election board calls you and we say, hey, you forgot to sign this. It's not going to count unless you sign it. You can still go to the polling place and vote a new ballot and it will count. It'll be a regular ballot. So I don't see any reason why people should not give it a chance, because election day is so uncertain. And in Missouri, where we have no early voting, where until now absentee voting has been only with an excuse, where normally a great majority of voters vote at a polling place on election day, that is, for an election administrator, it's kind of a frightening scenario, because then everything's riding on election day and we have no idea. We don't know what's going to happen. Is there going to be an uptick in COVID cases? Are a lot of election judges going to cancel at the last minute because they're scared to work? Or the building owners of some polling place going to call me the day before the election and say, you can't vote here tomorrow because of COVID, which happened to us earlier this year. So there are all these unknowns that could really adversely affect somebody's ability to vote on election day. So I really encourage folks to apply for absentee ballot, vote through the mail. Of course, they can vote absentee in person, as was mentioned, and Jennifer had all those dates up already. But one thing, and Jennifer, I think, alluded to it, that we just started in St. Louis County this year, really as a reaction to the COVID pandemic. We are allowing voters in St. Louis County to vote at any polling place in St. Louis County. So if you're a St. Louis County voter, you can vote at any St. Louis County polling place. And that really just helps us build resiliency into the process. So if one of those kind of nightmare scenarios, if one of those does occur prior to election day or on election day, we can just tell people, you know what, you can just go down the street, vote the same ballot at the polling place down the street. Or if it's just more convenient for you to vote closer to where you work or to where you're going to be for whatever reason on election day, it's just another great option for voters. And to circle all the way back to the beginning where Ruth was kind of given the introduction, Gloria Bilchek, who wrote the book Election Insiders, that was written largely about our office in St. Louis County. And I can't encourage you enough, all the viewers out there, to read this book, because it's not an academic study of election administration. It really is kind of a narrative behind the scenes look at how the process works and what the people behind the scenes are doing. And it's somewhat entertaining, I think. I mean, it was very entertaining for me, but I think, it's not a dry read by any means. And to your point, Michelle, there is a lot that goes into election administration and to pulling off an election. We're working behind the scenes at all this little minutia to get everything ready to go. It's kind of amazing that elections happen at all in some respects, and how many moving parts there are. But we have a very dedicated staff in St. Louis County, and we try very hard to make it all work. I don't want to blabber on too long, because I really want to give folks a chance to ask questions. I really enjoy taking questions from the public. But if there's anything else in particular you'd like me to address, I'd be certainly happy to do that.
Oh, thank you all so much. There was a lot to cover, and I will just take the questions in order, and whoever you think is best suited to answer them, we can go from there. And so the first one I received is, in April, I mailed in an application for an absentee ballot for the presidential, which was allowed because of the risk of COVID. Do I have to submit any other form in order to receive a ballot in the mail for November 3rd? And when should I receive that ballot?
I'll go ahead and take that one. If you sent in an application earlier this year for the November election, you don't need to send anything else in. We start mailing those ballots on September 22nd. So I would hope by, that first week of October, you would be receiving your ballot.
If someone has been receiving ballots by mail because they are permanently disabled, Do they still have to request a mail-in ballot this year?
The process for voters on the permanently disabled list has not changed. And just to explain that a little bit, Missouri has a process where somebody can sign up, and Jennifer did mention it. I forgot about that. She even showed the forms there. So if somebody signs up for the permanently disabled list, that doesn't mean they receive a ballot automatically every election. It means they receive an application automatically every election. We just sent those applications out to the permanently disabled list last week in St. Louis County. We have about 20,000 voters on that list in St. Louis County. And so once it comes with a postage prepaid return envelope, once those voters return those applications, we process them and send them a ballot, just like has always been the case with the permanently disabled list.
And that answered the next question was, when can she expect to receive that form? So that's perfect. Thank you. There are a lot of questions about Amendment 3, both them getting over email and on the YouTube chat. I just want to mention that our program next month, October 8th, is focusing entirely on Amendment 3. It's called The Dirty Details, Defeating Amendment 3. So our panelists aren't necessarily experts in the issue, but yes, there was a ballot rewrite that the judges released yesterday, and that appears to be the language the ballots are going with. And please come back and join us October 8th if you want a real in-depth dive on Amendment 3. Eric, could you tell people what are the locations where ballots may be taken in person?
Sure.
I'm assuming they're asking if they want to turn in person or absentee, because we've all covered the mail-in has to be returned by the mail-in mail only.
Right. In St. Louis County, in addition to our main headquarters office in St. Anne, the 4 satellite offices we open up on October 22nd are the North County Rec Center up near Blackjack, the West County Government Center out on Clarkson Road in Clarkson Valley, the South County Government Center down in Melville, and the Mid-County Branch Library in Clayton. And there you go. Thank you, Michelle, for putting that up, or whoever did.
It's a team effort. Okay, can you talk about the variety of voting machines used across the country and the security associated with them?
Sure. It's not a quick answer, but you can actually find out what different voting machines are used in different places at verifiedvoting.org. It's verifiedvoting.org. The best, in terms of security, the most secure voting system is one where you have a paper ballot and you mark your choices on it carefully to make sure they're correct, and that is scanned by a scanner. And then you have an audit afterwards, ideally a risk limiting audit, where the election officials can check a small number of those ballots against what the scanner said the final result of that election was, and verify to a high level of confidence that the scanner gave the right result, the election result was correct. Those are actually 2 different kinds of audits, but I'm lumping them in for the sake of speed. A lot of folks have other types of voting systems still. The least safe voting system is one that has no paper at all. It's a system that a bunch of states still use. Louisiana still uses a paperless system. Most states are moving away from that. New Jersey still mostly uses that. And some disabled voters only have that as an option still in some places. And that does not allow you to do a legitimate recount. If there's any problem, it doesn't allow you to do an audit that can prove that the election results were what the voter intended to a high degree of statistical confidence. Then there's an in-between. It's called a ballot marking device. And there's different systems that are within this bucket, but often it's a touch screen where you pick your results and then it prints a ballot and you have a chance to look at it and then it casts that ballot. And that's the system that has to be available, either that or a paperless voting machine, because just writing on paper, marking your choices is not an accessible option for many people with disabilities. And every voter has a right to show up at their polling location and have an option that they can use to make their choices. So there always will be both paper that you can mark by hand, ideally, and another option, a ballot marking device. or a paperless system. But we would really like to get rid of those paperless systems entirely because they can be hacked and there's nothing you can do to detect the hack. So that's not good. But ballot marking devices and hand marked paper ballots in every polling location would make our elections much more secure. And if you have the option and it's safe and doable option for you personally, hand marking a paper ballot is the most secure way to go. And then if you don't have an audit already happening in your county that you can observe after the election to make sure that those ballots were counted accurately, that's something you can ask for as time goes on.
Thank you. I have a question of how are we doing on getting poll workers? And so I guess Eric will direct that to you as well.
Sure. We in St. Louis County are trying to get 500 more poll workers than we had for the August primary election. So far, we've had a pretty good response. It was recently National Poll Worker Recruitment Day or something like that. And we're getting a pretty good response. The biggest hurdle that Missouri election authorities run into, though, in recruiting poll workers or election judges, as they're called under state law in Missouri, is this partisan requirement. In order to have a legal polling place, there must be an equal amount of Republican and Democratic poll workers in that polling place. And so as many viewers can imagine, in St. Louis City and St. Louis County, we almost always have more Democrats than we can use and never enough Republicans. And it's an opposite problem out in places like St. Charles County and Jefferson County. So I would encourage if anybody listening or watching, if they are a Republican or have Republican friends, we can certainly use them. And so can St. Louis City. That is usually our most desperate need.
We will do our best. We all have Republican friends and Democratic friends and independents. There's fewer of those around, but we will do our best. Jennifer, can you review again how people can get a ballot application and how they can request it? I'm getting some questions about that.
Well, so ballot applications are available on every election authority's website, although I think, if I'm not mistaken, Eric, there's been some problems with the St. Louis County website generally that also affects the election board's website. Is that the case? That's true. As you may have read in the paper today, that the county website went down last week to prevent a pending cyber attack. There's a limited portion of the election board website back up. The absentee ballot request form is up there now, but not a whole lot else. Okay. And you can also always get the absentee ballot request form from the Secretary of State's website. As long as you send it in to your own election authority, that application is completely fine to use. And you can, again, either email or fax it back in to make it really quick. Eric, can you also request an application form by email from St. Louis County? Absolutely. And as a fail-safe, or if people don't have internet access, they can just call us and we'll mail them an application.
Thank you. And I have some legal questions about, is there a law that says absentee ballots cannot be counted until the end of election night? I assume what they're getting at is, why can't they be counted as they arrive and then we don't release the totals but then have them when it's ready to go? And I'm not sure if Jennifer or Eric or Keeney want to. Oh, I think that's definitely a question for Eric, although I don't think I know that there's a law about when you can start processing them, but I don't think you have to hold them until the end. And if I'm not mistaken, Eric, right, St. Louis County reports their absentee results first, right?
Yes. The first result you see on election night, those are the absentee results, or at least what we have received to that point that we've been able to process. But there's kind of an important semantic and legal distinction here. What the Missouri state law says is that 5 days before the election, we can begin to prepare the absentee ballots for tabulation. Tabulation cannot occur until after 7 p.m. on election night. So what happens is that starting 5 days before the election, we start opening the absentee ballots in bipartisan teams is required by law. The ballots are extracted, they are scanned, but they are not tabulated. Nobody in my office has the ability to know any of the absentee results until we take the memory card out of the scanner, take it over to the tabulating computer, which then tabulates it. And that doesn't happen until after 7 p.m. But we are able to scan as many ballots in as we can get scanned in and have them ready to tabulate instantaneously in between 7 and 7:30 p.m.
Thank you.
Oh, but I should, if I'm just one more thing, just so people know, because I noticed this in the August election, the Secretary of State's website doesn't seem to take the absentee ballot reporting until the end of the evening, even though the other, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Eric, because I noticed on election night there were different results in St. Louis County than on the Secretary of State's website. They had some results for St. Louis County, but it clearly didn't match up with what you guys had. So somebody told me they report the absentee ballots last on the Secretary of State's website, even though you're reporting them first. Is that right or wrong?
I'm a little bit embarrassed to say this, but I have no idea what they do at the Secretary of State's office. I'm so busy just getting the ballots counted, tabulated, and posted. What happens, just so folks know, the kind of the behind the scenes, is once we post a report online, the Secretary of State essentially just takes a screen grab and they manually type those into their result reporting module. There's no like fancy data transmission going on with any election authorities in Missouri. So to be honest, I don't know what they do at the Secretary of State's office.
But I think it's safe to say then maybe when people are concerned about results, like, there's no reason to wait moment by moment on election night, because apparently there's a lot of different ways that the data gets put in. So waiting a little bit for the results might be, a good thing to do.
We're all going to have to be patient, which is not easy. I'm getting some questions about the city, and so I don't know that we can answer them necessarily. I hope we can. Do you know if the ballot requests are automatically sent to permanently disabled voters in the city, like the request card is, as it is in the county? Does anyone know that?
I mean, it should be the same. That process should be the same in every jurisdiction. I mean, so if somebody's on the permanent absentee list, they definitely have to receive a request form. Nobody's going to automatically get a ballot. They have to fill out a request form and send it back.
Okay. And a question I have for Arkane, who, oh, you're back. Thank you. She had a slight power outage, so we're grateful she returned to us. Can you discuss how the national conversation surrounding election security might influence local elections, how that trickle down really has an effect?
That is a complicated question. I should say there's a flooding in my neighborhood and then a lot of storms, so you might lose me again. How does that, so there's a couple of different things. The first top line piece about election security, unfortunately, is that yes, our elections are vulnerable, but also folks like Eric and his colleague Rick Stream are working very hard to protect your vote. And you have paper ballots as an option if you're able to use them throughout your state. And so you have a good protection in that. So we don't want people's fears, which are, concerns that are legitimate about security of our election, to actually do the work of those who wish to disrupt our elections for them by making people not trust the election itself, right? A lot of what we're seeing is disinformation. It is attacking a culture of democracy, which is just as critical as having a fair voting system. We need people to believe that we can come together and make decisions as a country together. And so there's a lot going on to divide us, as I talked about, in the disinformation side. That's obvious. That's been consistently reported by intelligence officials since 2016 at least, and known by them earlier. The thing that people fixate on about hacks of the count is just one of many ways that you can hack an election, and we're hoping that we don't see chaos, but that may be another way that attackers might want to try to discredit the election by taking websites down or making it look like there's a problem with the election, even when in fact Eric and Rick have your ballot, and they're going to do what they need to do with that ballot in a machine that's not connected to the internet, and that's going to tell them the number that they need to know, and they're going to make sure that that number is right. So there's like the basics of how our elections work, and then there's all of this going on to try to ruin our faith in our system, even though there's parts of it that are very solid. On the other hand, like there's a lot more that could be done. A lot of election offices need to do a bunch of really basic things on security and tech, and they don't have the money to do it. So that's why it's so important that Secretary Ashcroft make that money available to counties that want to use it. Some of them just need more IT hours. They need their county IT person to help them make sure their voter database access is secure, and make sure that they have 2 passwords on all of their systems, including like how they edit their website. Just basic security things that we need to fund. So funding is really important. We are getting there. People want to get there, but it is definitely something you can ask your local election officials about, in addition to becoming a poll worker and supporting them.
Thank
You
you.
can go to secureourvote.us, and there's a ton of information about how to have those conversations in a respectful way.
Can you say that website one more time?
Secureourvote.us, and lots more resources on everything that I've mentioned here.
Can someone address what is curbside voting and how will it be implemented in November?
I can take that. Curbside voting is provided for in Missouri state law, and what it means is that a voter can drive to a polling place or to the election authority office and request that they vote from their car, essentially. Now, the state law does say it's reserved for people with physical disabilities, and I always encourage people who have disabilities that might consider curbside voting to please try absentee voting through the mail, and if they really do not prefer that option, to drive to the election board main office and curbside vote there, because it will be more efficient. It's important for everybody to know that while curbside voting is provided for in the law, it will be available at every polling place on election day. It is administratively very difficult because it takes 2 election judges away from processing voters inside to go outside, bring a ballot to a voter, and assist them in casting that ballot. So we did see in August in a number of scenarios where people had to wait a long time for curbside voting at polling places because the poll workers were very busy inside. So it is available. It's, in my opinion, probably the least optimal way to vote. There are better options, going to our office or voting through the mail.
Thank you. A question I received about option 2 on the ballot, which is people that say they are voting absentee to avoid contracting COVID. The question is, are there groups poised to contest or litigate the use of option 2 by people who are healthy but voting absentee to avoid contracting COVID? Is voting that way a risky move?
Well, I'm going to let Eric talk about that part of it, but I just want to say that what the law says is that you can use that excuse if you expect to be confined due to illness or disability or are a caregiver for someone who is. I mean, and that language is pretty broad in terms of, like while excuse number 7 is like super specific about what the risk factors they have set forth for COVID are. Excuse number 2 is much broader. I mean, it doesn't necessarily even say that the voter has to be, actively ill. You're just confined due to illness. So, the language itself is really, really broad, and, how it's interpreted, I guess I'll leave that to Eric to discuss, but, it would be difficult, I think, to, on a large scale, challenge something where, there's no medical records involved. And part of it is kind of like a personal decision, being intellectually honest with yourself and what you feel comfortable doing given the statutory language. So that's what I would say about it.
I agree with Jennifer. She explained it very well. I think at the Board of Elections, we don't try to interpret that law. We take a voter's application at face value. If they check that box, we send them a ballot based on that reason. You could never 100% rule out that somebody could challenge something to do with the election. I would say, just as Jennifer kind of made the point, realistically speaking, logistically speaking, I don't know how somebody could challenge that many ballots. I mean, they would have to investigate the medical records or state of mind of tens of thousands of voters, and I just don't see that being realistic.
And not just challenging the state of mind of the voters, but also the statutory language itself, because again, it says the voter is confined due to illness. It doesn't say it's the voter's illness, it's just illness generally. So given the language, that would be a heavy lift for somebody who was going to challenge it.
Thank you. To answer the question that was asked about where can ballots be taken in the city, we found that the St. Louis City Board of Elections Commissioners has posted that Booter Library, Central Library, Julia Davis Library, and Schlafly Library will be open starting October 12th through November 2nd, 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday, Tuesday, Friday, and Saturday. The hours are a little confusing, I know. And 1 to 7, Wednesday and Thursday. I would suggest, if you want the specific details, to visit the St. Louis City Board of Elections Commissioners Facebook page, Twitter page, or their direct website, and you can see all of the locations and times that you may do your voting at satellite locations similar to the ones that the county has been offering. And then Jennifer, another question for you is, can you explain more about the role of the volunteer social media monitors, if somebody was interested in that?
So this is a new program I think the Election Protection has this year, and it's really cool. There are two main aspects of it. One is going out and helping voters. So you can, search your local social media circles or just, and anything in your area and look for certain keywords, just trying to find posts by voters who are having difficulties or reporting problems, and then responding to them by saying, hey, you need to call 1-866-OUR-VOTE. You have options, you have the right to, just that kind of thing, and reinforcing that help is available. And then the other aspect is monitoring social media for misinformation, disinformation, and manipulation, and reporting that to, Junkipedia or Common Cause. I think, that was talked about earlier. It was like commoncause.org/disinfo. Also junkipedia.org are two places where disinformation and misinformation can be reported and then evaluated by people who can decide what type of response is needed. But I do think that social media monitoring is really important. And I also think it's really important that younger people get involved in it, because I know that just within our circles of election protection in Missouri, when we talk about it, we tend to all be people of a certain age who are talking in a very narrow paradigm of Facebook and Twitter. And yet there's this whole universe of, say, Snapchat and TikTok out there. I have been well educated on TikTok by my 15-year-old daughter, and it actually is something that I think people should get to know a little more about. And the social media monitoring program is a way to do that.
Thank you. Eric, can you, if you even know the numbers offhand, I want to put you on the spot, tell us how many absentee ballots were requested in August and how many were actually fulfilled? Sure.
And first of all, I've never heard of Junkipedia, so that's a new one for me. I have to check that out. In August, we had about 100,000 requests for absentee and mail-in ballots. They were all fulfilled, meaning we sent voters all those ballots. We had about 85,000-ish that were cast and counted. I
think
want to
that's the
say,
question I meant, was how many were
Okay.
then sent back?
yeah, yep. And then about 1,200 were ballots were subsequently rejected. And that's back to the point Jennifer was making in her presentation, that there were voters that forgot to sign it, that forgot to have it notarized, and then a significant amount that were received late after Election Day. So I can't emphasize enough to read the instructions, sign that dang thing, notarize it if you got to get it notarized, and do not procrastinate. Send it back early.
None of us can repeat it enough, is make a plan, request your ballots, and send it back as soon as you can. And that you don't have to worry about the post office delays. You don't have to worry about it. If your vote's going to count, it's all going to count. Just get it done early and be free of worry. Someone asked, Eric, are the satellite offices that open now different than when they were in August, or is it all the same locations?
They're all the same locations in St. Louis County.
That were in August. Thank you. And do any of you either have any anticipation of what turnout will be? I know it's a big question. I don't think anybody has the answers, but we've been asked it. So
I hope it's high. I mean, I'm sure Eric probably does have an estimate, but my gosh, what turnout is going to be is entirely dependent on us. So get out and vote. I mean, that's what determines turnout.
absolutely. We do have, if Laura is free, we do have a screenshot of the St. Louis City locations that are available for early voting and dropping off a ballot. And I think she's going to put those up when she can. So be on the lookout for those as we're talking. We have a screenshot of those. And then another question I received was, how are the voting rolls secured?
You want to start with that, Eric, and I can chime in if there's anything to add.
Go for it.
Yeah, I'm happy to start with it, and I'm sure Akani can fill in some gaps. And I want to say I've never met you, Akani, but you know your stuff, and everything she's been saying tonight has been spot on. It's been great. So just in general, and specifically in St. Louis County, the voter rolls are secured and maintained in a number of ways. The Missouri Centralized Voter Registration Database is administered by the Secretary of State's office. Every local election authority has access to it. It is segregated from the regular internet. You cannot just go to it and look at it, log on to it. Although it is online, though it is on the internet more broadly. So there are a number of protocols that the Secretary of State takes to secure it. And I don't even know what they all are because they don't tell us. They won't tell us. But I can tell you in our office, all of our employees receive regular cybersecurity training. There is two-factor authentication to sign into the voter database. And we track the changes in numbers in the voter database. And what I mean by that is, going back to list maintenance, on a regular basis, we receive from different sources voters who have died, and we mark them as deceased, voters who have been disqualified because of felony convictions, voters who have moved to other states. We're in a consortium with a number of other states, about 25 other states, to share voter moves in between states. And so we're constantly, the voter database is constantly changing. Every minute of every business hour of every day, we are updating it and keeping those lists maintained. And so when we look at those numbers, I look at those numbers on at least a monthly basis, if not more often, to see, did we have an abnormal spike in the amount of people who were marked as deceased, or the amount of people marked as disqualified? And if there's any kind of outlier, then that's kind of it could be an indication that somebody has tampered with the database somehow, and they've been moving voters around or marking them as deceased. So we really track that closely to make sure that, there's a cyclical pattern to those numbers in the voter database. And if anything's out of whack, then that gives us pause, and we investigate it. So But I think probably Kenny can speak to more broadly nationwide, kind of what goes into voter databases and voter list maintenance.
Sure. Yeah. So we saw Russia scanning voter databases in all 50 states or close to in 2016. That was an obvious thing that they did. They wanted folks to know, it seems. There's ways to do hacks that are very subtle. Norton Symantec was hacked and didn't know for years, for example, the folks who make the antivirus software. So it's possibly very stealth. They were not. So whether that was to make us really worried and kind of discredit our system, or we don't know what the intent was, but that's one of the reasons that we're paying attention and why it's great that Eric is checking the audit logs is what we call it, to make sure that there's nothing weird, like why did something change in the middle of the night? Who did that? So election officials should be checking, and you can have their IT person do this if they're not, available to do it themselves very regularly to see if there's anything strange. But the other piece, they really do rely on you checking your registration, because there can be a hack that doesn't change the number of voters. It can change your address to be your old one, or it can scramble data in a way that wouldn't necessarily show up unless you check. So there's a give and take here, where the more that you check your registration, like at least once, you don't need to do it every day or anything like that, but check it once, tell your friends to check it, and correct any problems, the better your voting experience is going to be. And the more information the election officials will have about what's going on. And if tons of people start saying, wow, suddenly my registration is out of date, or looks like it's not in there anymore, maybe there was a problem, the better they can respond in advance. Because what we don't want to have happening is people showing up on election day and suddenly they're being told to go to a different precinct, or they're being told that they're not registered anymore. Those are the kinds of things that could be evidence of a hack, or they could be evidence of an error, and we just will not know on election day. So if something horrible happens, you should report it to 866-RVOTE. You should make sure your election officials know about it clearly, what happened. And if you have your proof of registration that you can print out, that's wonderful. Not necessary, obviously, if you're mailing in or absentee voting. So it's a give and take. We need election officials to monitor the database. They ideally wouldn't be online. It makes things more awkward because of the updates that Eric was talking about. But that's the ideal, is that they're not actually, there's a sacred state database that's not online, and there's a copy that's being updated periodically very often. That's online. That's a lot of detail. You can find out more at securavote.us if you're interested.
And one other just really quick thing, just to reemphasize why I'm such a fan of voting absentee by mail. If you apply for an absentee or mail ballot now, we'll discover if there's any issue with your address, if there's been a mistake or something malicious happened. So that's what's so nice about it. We'll figure that out before election day. We'll get it fixed, and you'll get your ballot, and you won't have to wait till election day to find out that, something happened. Just to give an example, we had one guy on election day in August, and in Missouri, since the statewide voter database is statewide, obviously, there was a person with the same name that registered to vote in a different county, and the county clerk merged the gentleman from St. Louis County with the person from the other county, and not realizing it, they were two different people. And so his record was merged with that other voter's record. He was still able to vote, but it took a lot of time to figure out what had happened on election day, and it was very inconvenient for that person. So we would have figured that out prior to election day if he would have voted by mail.
And I suppose if you apply now, they could even find it out before the voter registration deadline in the event that, something really dire happened and you would need to re-register, right?
Absolutely. But in a case like I just described, if it's an administrative error, we can correct that even after the registration deadline. But I could not agree with you more. Apply now.
Just one thing, if you do show up and for some reason you're not in the rolls or it's scrambled, insist on getting your provisional ballot and voting that no matter what. That's really important, and following up and making sure that that's verified. You have a right to vote, even if there's a problem with your registration. assuming that you are eligible to vote, of course. And though these things can happen, there has been problems and errors in voter databases that we've been able to track through 866 Our Vote. Like there was in Los Angeles in 2018, people showed up and had this exact problem I'm describing. It was an error. It's not common, and you don't want to scare people from voting by suggesting that it is. It's just something to be aware of.
We want to be respectful of everybody's time, so I just have 2 more questions before we close. And also I want to say, everybody participating, if you've been motivated and energized by this conversation and are looking to register voters, we hope you'll join our Map the Vote registration drive. You can visit our website at womensvoicesraised.org to learn more and sign up. Map the Vote uses publicly available data to map locations that are likely to have unregistered voters. We'll do everything for you in terms of the packets. We'll prepare packets containing voter registration forms, informational flyers, plus a pre-stamped and pre-addressed envelope back to the local Board of Elections. All you do is drop it at the unregistered voter's door in a totally contactless and COVID-safe way. I know door-to-door is not everybody's thing, so if you want to support the effort but not go door-to-door, you can also donate to offset the costs of printing and stamps. Due to COVID, there has been a significant drop in voter registration drives, and so every potential voter reached makes a huge difference. If you're interested, request your packets by tomorrow so we can get them prepared, and visit our website if you'd like to join us. Having said that, talking about registration, when people, after they register and they request their ballots, what options are there to notify voters that a ballot has been rejected? And then after that, how can they cure that ballot?
Well, I'll start there. It's important to know that in Missouri, there is no requirement that the election authority contact a voter whose absentee or mail ballot was deficient, and there is no statutorily prescribed method for curing it. This is really a patchwork across the state. This will differ greatly from county to county. In St. Louis County, we do try to contact voters, whether by mail or by phone, if there's a deficiency, and give them the opportunity to come to our office to correct the deficiency. If they can't do that, perhaps to go to a polling place and vote a new ballot. But of course, not every voter is able to do that for a number of reasons. So that is a glaring deficiency, in my opinion, with Missouri law. And it just goes back to the points that have been made earlier about doing this early. So at least in St. Louis County's case, we have time to contact the voter in case they did miss something.
And I think that's also a reason that voters need to be super proactive with their own ballots. And, I know that there are various ballot tracking methods and that sort of thing, but I think it's really incumbent on the voter to keep track of their own ballot and call just to make sure. I mean, when you get closer to election day and maybe you haven't heard anything on your tracker or you don't have access to tracking in your county, call the election authority and see if your ballot was accepted. So if it was accepted, and please correct me if I'm wrong, if it's marked that your ballot was received, then your ballot was actually received and it was valid and it has been put in the queue to be counted. And if it has not been received, it either didn't show up or was rejected for some reason. But in either case, you still have recourse. You can still go and vote, and that won't be a problem. If your ballot was never received by the election authority, you still have the option to go vote and cast a valid ballot in person.
That leads perfectly into the last question of the evening, which is, what is ballot tracking? How do voters use it? And is it available in the metro area in terms of St. Louis City, St. Louis County, and St. Charles, or is it a truly Board of Elections specific perk, I guess is the...
I've never heard of us having perks, but maybe that is one in St. Louis County. So we do have a ballot tracker in St. Louis County, at least. There's a detachable stub that comes with absentee and mail ballots, and it has a unique serial number of sorts that voters can log onto a website with to find out if we've received their ballot. And as Jennifer said, I encourage people to do that first. And then if they don't see it there, then they can call us. I think we might be the only county in Missouri that is doing that. I don't know for sure about St. Louis City. They may be looking into that. But I think we would be the only one or two counties in the state that are doing that at this point.
So Jennifer and Hane, can you offer any other advice then to non-St. Louis County voters who are sending in ballots, how they can ensure they were received?
Well, they'll probably just have to do it the old-fashioned way and make a call to their board of elections. I mean, and do that. I mean, that's why this is one of those things where everybody has to kind of feel empowered to get a ballot cast by knowing what your options are, making a plan, and then following through with it, and knowing where you can get help if you need it. I mean, until 7 p.m. on election night, and then I guess even later than that, if you were in line at a polling place at 7 p.m., you know, you still have the opportunity to cast a valid vote, and honestly, leave no stone unturned. You know, I mean, if you want to vote, you can vote. You just may have to be, you know, put a little more effort into it if something goes wrong, but you do have options.
Thank you everyone for joining us. If either Eric or Kane have any closing words you want to leave us with, now would be the time.
Thanks for having me. I've enjoyed it. Like I said, I love taking questions, and it's been great.
Thanks so much for having me. Same.
Thank you everyone for joining us. If you are interested in learning more about Amendment 3, you can come back next month because that is our topic for next month. And make a plan. Like Akane said, 866 our vote solves all problems. If you have questions, concerns, aren't sure what to do, if a friend of yours that lives in another state doesn't know what to do, it is a national number. It's not just for St. Louis. So when you see that number somewhere, spread it, share it. You know it's verified information that can help you. Thank you again, everyone. And if you're interested in helping us register voters, join our Map the Vote project by tomorrow. And thank you so much.
Good night.